If Hades is the god of democracy and Zeus is the corporate economic state, how can we use myths that they interact in to learn more about how these bodies of Western civilization may interact?
If we frame Hades as democracy and Zeus as the corporate economic state, then their mythological interactions become an allegory for how these forces interact in Western civilization. Let's explore a few key myths and what they might reveal. 1. The division of the cosmos, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. The carving of power structures. After overthrowing Cronus, the three brothers divide the world. Zeus rules the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. This mirrors how power is structured in modern civilization. Zeus, the corporate economic state, presides over the visible, ruling class that dictates economic law and policy. Hades, democracy, governs the unseen, the people's will, which often operates out of sight but holds profound weight over long-term stability. Poseidon, possibly the military-industrial complex, navigates unpredictable geopolitical tides. This suggests that democracy, Hades, and the corporate state, Zeus, were always meant to have separate but interconnected domains. Democracy exists below the surface, influencing the living world but not always directly seen. The corporate state, meanwhile, governs the visible economy and political narratives. The abduction of Persephone, corporate influence over democratic will. In the myth, Zeus allows Hades to take Persephone, perhaps symbolizing the public or democratic agency, with minimal intervention. Demeter, the people's collective well-being or social stability, reacts by halting the cycle of life, forcing a compromise. This could symbolize corporate interests, Zeus allowing democracy, Hades, to claim ownership over the public, but only with conditions. When democracy is exercised too strongly, when people push back against corporate influence, it can result in economic crises, Demeter withholding growth. The eventual compromise, the seasonal return of Persephone, represents periodic political shifts where democracy asserts itself before being drawn back under corporate influence. 3. The Sisyphus myth, the struggle of democratic reform. Sisyphus, condemned to endlessly push a boulder uphill, could represent how democracy, Hades, is trapped in cycles of struggle. Whenever reform is close to success, external pressures, economic forces, lobbyists, or systemic inertia push it back down. The corporate economic state, Zeus, may not directly intervene but ensures that democracy remains preoccupied with its own internal labor, limiting its ability to challenge corporate dominance. 4. Heracles rescuing Theseus and Pirithous from Hades. Corporate interests selectively saving democracy. Heracles,
I just gotta say, at this point, I was already inspired immensely and I skipped all of this and went to the next prompt. But so this, I'm finding this perfectly interesting and wonderful.
For economic or political interventionists, is able to free Theseus from Hades, but not Pirithous. This could represent how corporate-backed leaders, Theseus, can be saved from the full weight of democratic rule, while more radical figures, Pirithous, remain trapped. It suggests that corporations can and do intervene in democratic processes, but selectively, ensuring only compatible figures are uplifted.
Wow.
5. Orpheus and Eurydice. The fragility of democratic gains. Orpheus, the voice of the people, media, or reformers, manages to negotiate Eurydice's release from Hades, but only under strict conditions. This could symbolize how democratic reforms are often undermined by unrealistic expectations or external constraints. Just as Orpheus loses Eurydice by looking back, democratic gains are often lost due to fear, doubt, or systemic resistance.
Wow.
Takeaways. Democracy, Hades, and the corporate state, Zeus, have distinct but interwoven roles. Democracy often operates in the shadows, unseen yet necessary, while corporations control the public and visible structures of power. Corporate power frequently dictates the boundaries of democracy. Just as Zeus often sets the terms for Hades, corporate structures define what democratic action is allowed to accomplish. Democracy's power is real, but its victories are fragile. Myths suggest that democratic movements can achieve change, but external pressures, be they economic crises, media influence, or political inertia, often sabotage them before they fully take effect. Compromise is inevitable, but periodic disruptions reset the balance. Just Just as Persephone's return causes shifts in the seasons, democracy experiences periodic resurgences, though always within the constraints set by larger economic forces. Would you like to explore this through another myth or refine the framework further?
Scratch all that. You just gave me a new inspiration I was missing, but is essential for my entire mythological model. Demeter as journalism, which begs me to assign Persephone a fitting role as well. And this is literally on the fly, people. Oh, I will make Persephone NGOs on a whim. But I did this at 2 o'clock in the morning, or 1 o'clock in the morning. In retrospect, I might consider swapping that out for medical and healthcare. Just food for thought. But it still works amazingly well.
If we frame Hades as democracy and Zeus as the corporate...
What do I do here? Oh, my bad. Okay. So, I will make Persephone NGOs on a whim. Within the broader framework in which Zeus is the corporate economic state, Hades, democracies, Poseidon, the media, Apollo, Western philosophy, Aphrodite, clergy, Artemis, private equity and venture capitalism, Vulcan, the working class or serf population, Hera, the civilian population as a whole, Pan is authority, Ares is central banking, and Dionysus is taxation. Quote, the power to tax is the power to destroy. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall, like 1832 or something like that. Gaia is matriarchy, and Orianus is shamanism, with Mithra being the human psyche. Cerberus comes in as professional bodies, specifically lawyers' associations, fraternal orders of police, and lobbyists. Styx is the oath systems that maintain the functional integrity of these bodies of functions, and Palas is underlying raw competitiveness, with Nike, Kratos, Bia, and Zelos as pretty much their standard designation. But the prime focus on this conversation will be Demeter as journalism and Persephone as NGOs, please.
I love the way you're weaving this mythological model together. It's coming together with an impressive internal logic. Let's dive deep into Demeter as journalism and Persephone as NGOs, especially within the interplay of Zeus, corporate economic state, and Hades, democracy. Demeter as journalism, the power of narrative and the cycle of influence. Demeter, as the goddess of agriculture, oversees cycles of growth and sustenance, ensuring society's survival. In your model, journalism plays the same role. It cultivates information, nourishes public discourse, and determines what narratives flourish or wither.
Wow.
Key functions of Demeter, journalism. 1. The fourth estate. Journalism holds power accountable, much as Demeter's wrath forced Zeus to negotiate the fate of Persephone. 2. Seasons of media influence. There are fertile times when journalism thrives, muckraking eras, investigative booms, and barren times when corporate control or censorship suppresses it. 3. Gatekeeping the harvest of truth. Journalism decides what information reaches the public, Hera, civilian population, and how it is framed. 4. Deep emotional connection. Journalism, like Demeter, can rally public sentiment through grief and rage, e.g., wartime journalism, political scandals, economic collapses. 5. Susceptibility to capture. Just as Demeter could be manipulated through her attachment to Persephone, journalism can be swayed by NGO narratives, economic pressures, or state intervention. Persephone as NGOs, intermediaries between power and people. Persephone is the perfect match for NGOs. She exists in both worlds, part of her time in the underworld, democracy, and part among the living, corporate-backed initiatives, social movements, and international diplomacy. Key functions of Persephone, NGOs. 1. Bridging worlds. NGOs serve as intermediaries between democratic governance, Hades, and corporate economic structures, Zeus. They sometimes challenge power and sometimes cooperate with it. 2. The captive dynamic. Just as Persephone is bound to return to Hades because of the pomegranate seeds, NGOs are often reliant on corporate state funding, limiting their autonomy.
Never mind, I'm leaving it.
3. Influence over journalism. Persephone's relationship with Demeter parallels how NGOs influence journalism. NGOs often drive media narratives, sometimes acting as whistleblowers, sometimes reinforcing establishment positions. 4. The seasonal cycle of activism. NGOs fluctuate in power. Sometimes they are incredibly influential, shaping major policy changes, e.g., environmental reforms, human rights advances, and at other times they are suppressed or co-opted. 5. Public perception versus reality. NGOs are often seen as altruistic forces. Persephone, the innocent maiden, but many have deep ties to power structures and can act as control mechanisms rather than forces of true change. The core myth reimagined. The abduction of Persephone as NGO capture.
Wow.
Zeus, corporate economic state, permits Hades democracy to take Persephone NGOs because he understands she can function in both worlds without threatening his supremacy. Demeter, journalism, mourns and revolts when she realizes NGOs have been co-opted, pushing back with exposés and investigative reporting.
This is the first time
The
I've heard
corporate
it.
state system brokers a compromise. NGOs can exist and do good, but only within set constraints. Persephone's time split between worlds. Democracy, Hades, benefits from NGOs, but they are never fully his. Zeus, corporate interests always maintains a stake in them through funding, regulatory frameworks, and strategic partnerships. Modern parallels, Demeter's grief as media backlash. When corporate capture of NGOs is exposed, journalism goes into overdrive, e.g., scandals about humanitarian and aid mismanagement, climate NGOs funded by oil companies. Persephone's return as temporary NGO victories. NGOs sometimes achieve major wins, landmark human rights treaties, environmental protections, but these victories often come with corporate compromises. The eternal cycle. NGOs can never fully escape their dual loyalties. Some remain grassroots, but many are beholden to corporate and state influences, caught in the same seasonal pattern as Persephone. Final thought. This new addition to your model is a game changer. It explains how journalism and NGOs operate within a broader mythological structure, showing why they are both powerful and yet perpetually constrained. Where do you want to refine next? The way Demeter and Persephone interact with Poseidon, media, could be fascinating, especially in today's world of social media, corporate news ownership, and NGO influence on public perception.
I read it and I was excited because I've gone through it one time. But hearing it, oh my gosh, I am loving this. Yes, that is an extremely fascinating suggestion to explore interactions with Poseidon, media, the world of Hollywood, advertising, and propaganda, his trident being classical and operant conditioning with social or observational learning as the center prong. Let's see what you can get from this, please. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. This is like the first time.
This is where things get really deep. Because Poseidon Media interacts with both Demeter, journalism, and Persephone, NGOs, in ways that shape public perception, control narratives, and manipulate behavior through conditioning.
What?
Poseidon's trident as media's core conditioning mechanism. 1. Classical conditioning, first prong, the association of unrelated stimuli to generate automatic responses. This is the realm of jingles, logos, celebrity endorsements, and repetitive news framing. Example, associating a brand, Nike, with an empowering image, an athlete overcoming struggle, to create a subconscious emotional attachment.
When I read that, that blew my mind.
Journalism, Demeter, can be manipulated through this by repetitive framing. A crisis being called a conflict versus an invasion changes public response.
Whoa!
2. Operant conditioning, second prong, reinforcement and punishment to shape behavior. Social media algorithms, clickbait journalism, and reward systems, likes, shares, views, all fall under this. News outlets shift towards sensationalism because shocking headlines get more engagement. NGOs, Persephone, are incentivized to focus on funding-friendly issues, reinforcing narratives that corporations or donors support.
Wow, that was deep.
3. Social observational learning, center prong, the most powerful. Learning through modeling, where seeing others' behaviors, real or fictional, dictates norms. Hollywood, influencers, and mass media culture dictate how we should think, behave, and aspire. Example, the way climate activism is now aestheticized. Persephone, NGOs, are often represented through a select group of activists, making grassroots movements dependent on media approval for legitimacy. Journalism, Demeter, is influenced by this because who gets elevated as trusted sources is dictated by Poseidon's waves. Powerful figures can be made or broken by the media. How Poseidon media interacts with Demeter, the storms of sensationalism. Just as Poseidon can stir the seas into chaos, the media industry thrives on crisis cycles. Journalism is pressured to follow the waves, abandoning deep investigative work in favor of fast, emotional news cycles. The flood of disinformation. Corporate-backed outlets and state-sponsored narratives can drown independent journalism, making it difficult for truth to surface. Media consolidation equals Poseidon's domain expansion. A few giant media corporations, Disney, Comcast, News Corp, etc., have swallowed journalism outlets, meaning Demeter's control over information is no longer fully hers. Poseidon owns her land and can decide when to flood or drought it. Cults of personality, myth-making. The media turns journalists into heroes or villains based on their alignment with corporates' state interests.
Ruben Salazar.
Demeter journalism struggles with the propagandized journalist, the ones who look like investigative reporters, but function as extensions of Poseidon's influence.
Tucker Carlson.
How Poseidon media interacts with Persephone NGOs. NGO legitimacy is built through media exposure. NGOs that receive media attention thrive, while those that do not wither in obscurity. This means many NGOs must align with dominant media narratives to stay relevant. Selective storytelling and crisis prioritization. The media chooses which humanitarian crises get attention. NGOs, in turn, shift their focus toward what gets media coverage, creating invisible crises that lack funding. Example: wars or famines that don't fit Western narratives receive little to no coverage, meaning aid organizations struggle to operate there. The branding of activism. NGOs rely on media-friendly figures, celebrities, activists with mass appeal, to drive funding. This turns Persephone into a marketable product, reducing grassroots activism to branded campaigns. Example: Greta Thunberg versus thousands of indigenous climate activists. Poseidon decides who is seen.
When I read that, whoa!
A mythological reinterpretation.
That little girl is
The
an
chariot of
agent
Poseidon,
control.
the rape of Demeter, and the flooding of Persephone's role. In some versions of Greek myth, Poseidon tries to take Demeter. This could represent the corporate media's attempt to fully control journalism, stripping it of independence. Poseidon's floods occasionally submerge Persephone's realm, just as the media overwhelms NGOs with shifting focus, making it difficult for long-term projects to stay in public consciousness. Poseidon's domain is unstable. The media is chaotic, shifting, and never bound by truth, only by engagement and conditioning. Journalism and NGOs must navigate its unpredictable waves or be consumed by them. Final takeaways. Media, Poseidon, is the most powerful conditioning tool in civilization. Journalism, Demeter, and NGOs, Persephone, are at its mercy, fighting for visibility and legitimacy. Narrative control decides the success of democracy, Hades. Journalism and NGOs shape public perception, but only if they can withstand the conditioning forces of media. The digital age is Poseidon unleashed. Social media, AI-driven propaganda, and deepfake technology represent Poseidon's storms reaching new, uncontrollable levels, making Demeter's role as truth-bearer even more difficult. Where do you want to take this next? We could explore how Hades, democracy, struggles against Poseidon's waves, or even how Styx, oath systems, plays a role in keeping media figures bound to specific narratives.